Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Psychedelics Today. This is Joe Moore. I am recording this intro remotely, and today on the show we have the founders of Holos, a group in Costa Rica doing some interesting retreat-style and community-style work. Folks on today are Ian-Michael Hébert and Alex Enchin. We actually got to record this in person, which is amazing, and I had a great time. Interesting crew, and very different, as you'll see. I think you'll see why we like them. And it's a really interesting group. So their advisors at Holos are Stan Grof, Leah Mix, Gabor Mate, Seth Miller, Sanjay Singhal, Tim Chang, Janet Zuccarini, and Jamie Wheel. Pretty solid set of advisors. So yeah, I don't know. Check it out. Holos.global. Really grateful for the conversation with Ian-Michael and Alex just yesterday, actually. They came to where I was. I think they drove an hour or two to get here. So thank you both for doing that, and hope it's worth it. Anyway, I think that's it for the intro, and we get into plenty in the podcast. So thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you on the other side, and first off with a few ads. We'll see you there.
Hey everybody, it's David here, letting you know that we are launching our next round of Navigating Psychedelics for clinicians and therapists. It starts on Wednesday, September the 14th, and then meeting each week for 9 weeks. And there are 2 groups with different time slots you can choose from. So Navigating Psychedelics is the course that I took a couple of years ago, and it changed my life and my career big time. And now I have the pleasure of co-facilitating this round of the course alongside our guest teachers, Jasmine Verdi and Sarah Reed. So if you want to find out more about the syllabus and the structure of the course, go to psychedeliceducationcenter.com. And you can also sign up for a free Q&A webinar that we're offering every Wednesday until the course starts. To book your webinar spot, go to psychedelicstoday.com/events.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Psychedelics Today. Coming from a backyard in Ventura, California. And I'm joined by, I think, co-founders of Holos. What's the full name?
Holos Global.
Holos Global.
But we, Holos for short.
Yeah.
Holos Global. Holos for short. Nice. Cool. And Ian-Michael and Alex Enchin, thanks for making it all the way up here from Los Angeles. Not a short drive. So I appreciate it.
Thank you for having us, Joe.
Absolutely. So let's start. What's the long and short? What is Holos Global?
The short of Holos Global is that we're a place where people can come home to themselves, home to an understanding of our relational nature as human beings, and a place where people can reconnect to nature.
That's great.
That's the short. The long is that Holos was inspired by Stan Grof's work and the holotropic paradigm and the returning to wholeness. Holotropic means returning to wholeness. And so the idea is, what is it like when we actually land there inside of being whole and recognizing ourselves as a fractal aspect of a greater universal pattern that's happening? And so we do work with psychedelic medicine, but it's much more than that. It's much more of how do we educate people in what it is to be human on planet Earth at this moment in time.
I like it. Anything to add, Alex?
No, I mean, that was really well said. It's awesome to hear that again and again and again. And the connection. I love your, when you and I met recently in Florida and took an Uber together and we're chatting about Stan Grof, I loved your longstanding, passion for his work, and was excited for you and Ian-Michael to connect, given Ian-Michael's long relationship with Stan. But for me, I mean, we can get into how we got connected and met, but yeah, Holos is really about, connection and community. And, I when I look at the kind of mental health challenges on the planet and in society, even before COVID, we're just really disconnected, from ourselves, from our bodies, from community and certainly from the environment. And we need places where people can go and do, deep personal work.
Mm-hmm.
And, my personal kind of story, I got interested in this work because my mom has been struggling with mental health issues for a number of years. And a very close family friend lost her battle with depression several years ago. And I was kind of determined to try to avoid that for my mom, and learned about antidepressants back in Toronto, where I'm from. And
were you impressed with the data
on antidepressants? Definitely not. I mean, I still can't believe that, and I'm happy that antidepressants help certain people and they find, relief from them. But, the figure that I'm familiar with is that 30% of people respond to SSRIs, and some of the respondents are only getting, marginal help. So I was really on like a personal quest.
Short term as well, probably.
Yeah. In many cases. Yeah. And I was on a quest to figure out what other options were available to people who are struggling with depression and PTSD and anxiety, and started living part-time here in California, and tuned in 2018 to this chatter around psychedelics, microdosing and ceremonial, intentional use, and was like, wow, this is really interesting. And I had taken psilocybin a handful of times in my, teenage years and 20s, and wasn't really familiar with this intentional way of using, these medicines. And then, I was walking down Harvard Street in Toronto one day, and I I had this weird sense to turn into a bookstore, look in the window, and saw this book by Michael Pollan, and it kind of looked at me, and I was like, wow, there's really something going on with psychedelics. Like, everyone in California is talking about it in a way that they weren't a year ago. And I kind of just, got that book and like went down a rabbit hole, and I can get, more into it later. But this work has really changed my life and the lives of a lot of people that I love and care about a lot. So I'm really passionate about it, and, really honored and grateful to be working with Ian-Michael to build these incredible centers for people to come and do this work.
Yeah. And how did you start bumping into this whole world of psychedelics and inner work and whatnot?
Well, probably before I was born. My parents were back to the land hippies, and they weren't big into psychedelics, but they moved to Alaska in the 60s/70s. And then I was born in the 80s. And so there was like this thread of that revolution that was happening in the 60s that flows through my genetics. And Alaska in and of itself is a psychedelic experience. I just returned from my 40th birthday, went back up there to visit this Mount Denali that I had a really powerful transcendent experience with when I was 20. But my psychedelic experiences began in my teens as well. I had suicidal depression, first attempted suicide when I was 11, and then was on SSRIs in my early teens, and then discovered psychedelics, and it really popped me out. It really reset my nervous system and the way that I saw the world. And I took that journey as far as I could at that moment. And by the time I was 17, I felt like I was in direct communion with a force greater than myself. And so I spent the next decade really focused on meditation and building houses and building retreat centers. And eventually the pursuit of truth, or the pursuit of knowledge, or the pursuit of direct experience of reality brought me to CIIS in California, California Institute of Integral Studies, where I studied psychology and did a master's there.
When did you get there?
Counseling.
Or when did you wrap up, or either way?
Yeah, I finished up in 2013.
Okay.
And that reintroduced me to that whole legacy of transpersonal psychology and mystical experiences. And as I completed my work there to become a therapist, a job opened up at Esalen Institute. And so I moved to Esalen to be the director of projects and rebuild their campus, because I had a background in construction. But I also had the opportunity to...
note there was a fire there, right?
Yeah.
Tragic.
Yeah, it's a place that is similar to Alaska in that Big Sur is a place of extremes. So extremes psychologically, physically, environmentally. And Esalen has always lived on the precipice. It's right there at the
literally
cliffs. Yeah. And literally the baths at one point fell into the ocean.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so it's a wild place, and it's the right place that a lot of the psychedelic revolution could take its next steps. So, MAPS really, in a lot of ways, was started out of a conference that was at Esalen, and Stan Grof's work with Christina. And so that reignited my interest in psychology as a means for understanding, as a means of understanding ourselves and understanding the universe, and psychedelics playing a role in that. So Holos really came out of my time at Esalen and Stan Grof's work that I was introduced to while I was there.
A couple threads. So, like, what is your kind of relationship with Stan, and then what is the relationship of Stan to Holos?
As I was completing my time at Esalen, rebuilding the campus there, Stan and his nonprofit came to me and they said, "Hey, Stan's had this dream of creating a center for transpersonal psychology that he's had since Christina and he were together and before she passed." So we started scouting locations around California and Central America, and I proposed the name Holos as a center that could also incorporate psychedelic medicine and plant medicine. So we had been looking for a number of years in Costa Rica, and then Stan had a stroke, and I put the idea down. But
was his stroke in 19 or 18?
It was 2018.
Yeah.
And then enough people knew that this dream was alive that they encouraged me to continue to pursue it. So it had enough legs that we moved forward with it, and he really recovered. And so he's an active advisor at this point, but he also, after his stroke, is moving slower. So a lot of the basis of what we're doing is in his work and in his approach to the perinatal matrices, but he hasn't been to the site yet. So we're working on getting the facilities to a point where we're comfortable inviting him and Brigitte. Yeah.
And you were just listening to our podcast with him and Brigitte on the way down, which is brilliant.
Yeah.
Love that. That was one of the biggest moments for us on the show to date. Yeah. Where do we want to go from here? So can you describe what you have right now in Costa Rica, or what like the kind of longer term plan is?
Yeah, we have a 200-acre farm with 2 kilometers of waterfalls and these beautiful swimming holes, a big farm, 30 lots that we're selling for people to constitute the community. And then we've got a glamping setup. So we've got 12 tents and a beautiful shala that we built out of bamboo for doing the work, doing group work, and a dining hall. And then just like thousands of species of everything from monkeys to butterflies to, it's one of the most biodiverse places on earth. So as far as getting back in touch with nature or life itself, it's a really potent place to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just add to that, when Ian-Michael and I met in August, met in person for the first time in August of 2020, I had just come out of a very powerful experience literally a week before on a retreat, having a very powerful psychedelic therapy experience that was, individual kind of work. And
can you name the molecule?
Yeah, I can. I think I can just not say when and where it happened, but
well, it was in a legal country.
It was a Shulgin medicine that rhymes with you tree me.
You tree me.
And I was coming out of this really profound journey, like the most healing experience that I've ever had, like deep early childhood stuff, some stuff about each of my parents. And I was coming out of this journey at this little bed and breakfast in fairly, immersed in nature. And I'm like sitting on the window looking out into the countryside after this journey. And I was like, wow, this is a really incredible way to do this. Like, I'm here for a week. I don't know where my phone is. There's a chef. There's a massage therapist coming tomorrow. I can go for a hike. I can swim. There are therapists here to help me kind of process and like start integration. And I was like, everyone seems to be talking about opening these ketamine clinics in urban areas. I haven't heard of anybody talking about like a canyon ranch or Esalen for medicine work. And that feels like we're really going to need places like that. And I would love to help create something like that. And then Ian-Michael and I met the next week in British Columbia in person for the first time. We had been connected about a year earlier remotely. And I had just had this vision of like, I want to build a boutique kind of hospitality project where people can come stay and do transpersonal kind of psychology and different healing modalities and yoga and meditation and just, be immersed in nature. And it felt really clear to me that the opportunity was in North America, that like Oregon was, on the horizon. Canada, where I'm from, is kind of moving towards probably a more medicalized model, but
The scene in British Columbia is wild.
yeah, I mean, British Columbia just
right around the corner.
decriminalized possession of
Almost
lots
everything.
of hard drugs.
Yeah.
Which is amazing news for safe supply and
I like to call them awesome drugs.
awesome drugs.
Yeah.
And it's funny because Ian-Michael, was already down in Costa Rica and was like really pushing this like Holos Project 1 is in the Diamante Valley of Costa Rica. And I had been to Costa Rica once before when I was about 17. And I just kind of felt like Costa Rica's far and there's already a lot of these retreat centers there. So I was like really not sold on it. And he, in the next couple of months, he really encouraged me to like come down here and like see what this place is all about. And I went down to the land in January of 2021 and, from Ian-Michael's house, hiked through the jungle with a group of about 12 of us into one of these waterfalls. And I was like, I've never seen anything like this in my life. And I just looked at him and I'm like, whatever you're dreaming up here, I'm a whole body yes. Like I want to help you do this. And, I've now been down to the land, I don't know, in a year and a half, probably 11 times or something like that, 10 times. And it's unlike any place I've ever been. And, our friend Günther, via one of his teachers, says the eco-shamanic field of this place is unlike anything I've ever experienced. And someone said to me recently that who was visiting for the first time, they said, getting here, you just kind of feel like everything is okay. Everything is okay. And it just, I can't wait for you to come visit, Joe, and for David and Kyle to come. It's such a magical place. And it's a really healing place. The land itself, and certainly the waters, and on all the 5 significant waterfalls on the premises. It is a place that has been asking for a healing center to be built on it, and just really honored to get to be a part of actually building it there. And then just to finish, you had asked about kind of the longer term vision. Just to clarify one thing Ian-Michael said about 30 parcels for constituting, like there's actually a residential community being built that kind of envelops the retreat center and healing center. And we have some incredible human beings who have bought land there and will build a home. Some will live there part-time, some will live there full-time. And we have clinical psychologists and somatic therapists and an NFL football player and sound healers and body workers and medical doctors and plant medicine, high priestesses, and like a really incredible group of human beings who are really passionate about the new world and the future of mental health, and certainly how psychedelics can be catalysts for personal transformation. And then we kind of have this like hybrid approach of the core of Holos programming is really about group work and group ceremony and taking some of the indigenous wisdom and knowledge of the different communities that work with plant medicine. And we also want to be a bridge for people who are more comfortable with individual work to like move into group work. So kind of having a place that's open to people who aren't ready for a group ceremony, who can come and have more of a Grofian, type of experience that has two therapists or guides, and one, participant. And also want to be a bridge between the indigenous wisdom and the more Western clinical approach, because we think they're really synergistic. And I love the intersection of, shamanic knowledge and neuroscience and, having people from, Cristina Mendoza, Don Jose Campos ayahuasca lineage with people who, are clinical psychologists, I think is an amazing place to be. And then the other piece of it too, which is more of like a hospitality kind of piece, is I really like observed when we were sort of starting working together that the places, that exist where people can go and sit in ceremony with plant medicine, there's not a entry point for people who are just curious about this stuff. There's not a place where, if you're a couple in their 60s from, Rhode Island, and you just read Michael Pollan's book and you've been following the great research from Imperial and Hopkins and NYU, and you're not ready to like take psilocybin or ayahuasca, where do you go to dip your toe? Where do you go to like check out what is this all about? So, eventually our sort of second phase in Costa Rica will be a place that's more like a boutique hotel, and people can come. There's no group programming. You can go to yoga, you can go to meditation, you can go to the spa, you can go forest bathing in the jungle. And for some people, there might be private psychedelic experiences. And for others, it might just be being on the land and being in community and meeting really interesting people who are doing this work is enough. So that was really important, is creating an entry point for people. And maybe in a year or 5 years, they're interested in medicine, but creating something that's more accessible and approachable to like a broader audience.
Two points. It's, I think, really important, to do group work. It's also really important to know that a lot of people actually are not ready for group work. They're actually in a really delicate point in their lives or whatever it is, and they need to do a little bit of personal work before they can be in a group. But I think there's like a lot of benefit to group. I have a question about how you're building in kind of like the Esalen, transpersonal, like Grof, kind of like ethos, frameworks, etc. Like, not like you have to have BPM diagrams everywhere, but like, how are you kind of, do you just have a lot of HR Giger work everywhere, or?
Well, one way that I've talked about it is this particular spot is like a portal for life and death. We have this really amazing canyon on the property that the water moves through. So there's like already these places where you can go experience the perinatal matrices like viscerally in the waterfalls. And for those that aren't familiar with the perinatal matrices, it's the stages of birth that most human beings go through, or that all human beings go through. Even if you were born cesarean, you have the impressions of the perinatal matrices, which are the stages of birth. So BPM 1 being in the amniotic bliss field, or maybe it's not blissful, depending on the condition of your mom, where all of your experiences are tied directly to her experiences of the world, and you're this little being that is growing. And then the second perinatal matrice is where, the world has kind of compressed, where you're this being inside your mother's womb, and it gets a little tighter. And then eventually it goes into a place where she's having contractions and the world is starting to close in on you. And so how she relates to that phase of the birth process imprints the way that you are experiencing the contractions of the world around you, or conflict. And then the third perinatal matrice is where you're actually moving through the birth canal, or the portal of being born. And there's so many places on the property where you can viscerally feel that the water is moving through this canyon. So those three perinatal matrices are very well represented just by this river. And then the fourth being where you are your own individuated being, and you are navigating the world as your own consciousness in a separate body. So
gorgeous.
Whether we talk about it or not, it is actually baked into the landscape itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so
you just have baked in natural metaphor.
Yeah, we have a baked in natural metaphor, and we do some education when it's appropriate in the retreats with that format. But transpersonal psychology is so much more than just the perinatal matrices, and encompasses the collective unconscious and indigenous traditions and a lot of different ways of seeing and being in the world.
Fadiman gave us a great definition not that long ago.
Yeah.
And it was something along the lines of, we're not trying to explain these things. We're just trying to make like a catalog of experiences, maybe one-off, or like types of experiences. And it's not how does ceremonial magic work. It's, hey, this happened to this person. They had a valid experience, and let's just say, hey, this is part of psychology.
Yeah.
As opposed to, no, we don't talk about that.
Exactly. It's a phenomenological approach where whatever you're experiencing is valid. And so part of the the mystery and magic of psychedelics or psychology in general is opening to the awe that we don't have all the answers. So like Esalen, I look for places that are a muse that induce that sense of awe. And so this is one of those places. You know, I grew up in the middle of Alaska, and I look for really strong muses in the natural environment that open people's aperture of what's possible in the physical world, which then catalyzes people into what's possible internally.
I like it. Yeah. It's, it's a hard story to tell. It's a hard experiment. But Alex, do you have anything to add?
Just because you brought up James Fadiman, I wanted to just add that, going back to your point about Esalen, and I really see this need for a gathering place or gathering places, certainly for like some of the amazing elders in the field, like a Fadiman, like Stan, certainly, and Rick, and all of the great people, Roland Griffiths and Tony Bossis, who's a dear friend of ours.
How old is Tony?
Tony's actually not that old. I shouldn't call him an elder.
40,
Tony's like
42.
No, Tony's like maybe 60.
Okay.
He's a sweet guy. I talked to him yesterday or 2 days ago. Hey, Tony. But like, we really need in this space, there's, as you know, Joe, better than anybody, there's like a lot of nonsense and like kind of jokers in the field.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. But there's a lot of amazing people. I mean, a lot of the people that I've met and that in the field are some of the most beautiful, heart-centered people on the planet that are doing this work. And it's not about money. It's about healing, and it's about mass mental health, and a more spiritualized humanity that can get together and solve problems. But I love the word enchanted. Enchanted, yeah. Disenchanted.
That's from ITA years ago.
Is
like,
it?
how do we re-enchant psychology or something like that? Yeah, that stuck with me for like a long time.
I mean, one of the ways of thinking about like the problems, the mental health challenges, is like people are disenchanted and disconnected. But just to finish that point, like, we really need places that, the great people, whether they're elders in the field or people that are just, beginning their path or just looking, to elevate their consciousness or improve their health or work through something, like gathering places for the great people. And that really motivates us to like create, places where Rick Doblin wants to come and spend time. And, when I was at Horizons in New York in December of last year, it was so clear to me that what's needed in this field, especially as it grows and proliferates, and is like a place where the amazing people in the field, many of, who are mostly the people at Horizons, can get together and like go deeper together and spend a week and, perhaps sit in ceremony, but like spend more time together than, a 72-hour conference in Manhattan, which is an amazing conference, but like Holos can be and will be, we believe that those places. And, the global and Holos Global is, like, obviously our intention is to do, a handful of these around the world. I like to tell people our intention is not to create the Marriott of psychedelics, nothing against Marriott, but like, this isn't about growing some huge thing with 1,000 centers. This is about doing a few really, really, really well, and about holding people with incredible care and creating places where people like you and David, regardless of our friendship, like if somebody called you and said, I'm going through divorce, or I just shut down my startup and I'm really having a hard time, like I need to go somewhere, that you would send people to Holos because you know how well they're going to be cared for, and that we're building places that you would send people you love. And yeah, that's really like our approach. And it's been interesting to see, companies in this space raise crazy amounts of money and go public on the Toronto Stock Exchange. I'm from Toronto, so that's been like a hard thing for me to see a lot of
I just learned all sorts of new stuff about regulation in the Canadian stock exchanges recently. We won't go there at length, but it's fascinating, the difference.
Oh, interesting.
It's substantial.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, there's just, it's a fascinating space. And, there was so much hype, there for a while. And, we were just, we kind of put our heads down and like, we're focusing on doing what we're doing really well with integrity and working with the best people in the world. I mean, we have some absolutely incredible investors and partners, and we just held 2 retreats in the last few weeks. I was there for both of them and witnessed truly, truly world-class facilitation and world-class programming. And I already knew this, but like it was just reinforced on me so heavily that we have just absolutely incredible humans and facilitators and programming at the core of Holos. And that's ultimately what it's about, is the programming and the people. And it just makes me so motivated personally. And we have an incredible team. We have a small team, but just unbelievable human beings who are all doing their personal work, which I think is so important. Is like everyone in the company, it's, fairly small head count at this point, but like everyone is doing their personal work. And I don't see how you can be, for lack of a better word, successful, healthy company in this space if everyone is not doing their personal work. It feels critical. And I feel, like honored and proud of the people, including starting with Ian-Michael that we work with. And our energetic field is attracting like a certain, type of people. And we've had some really incredible human beings come through, on some of the first retreats that we've held. And it's been a tremendous privilege to see people have, transformational experiences and just really connect deeply with Holos and really feel part of the community, because it's ultimately like a community that we're building. And just really excited about, the future of this company and organization.
So I had been part of this, when did we start? Like May 2016. I think 2017 or 18, we started hearing about psychedelic retreats popping up, legal mushrooms in different places. So we're like, oh, cool. Like there's companies out there doing this already and we don't need to do it. And we had validation from some experts in the field and that it was okay to go to this place. I'm like, okay, cool. I had a horrible experience and I saw some people nearly die and I had to get really involved in some stuff that was way outside the scope of our agreement and scope of work and all this stuff. And it was sad. Took us months to recover, energetically, emotionally, Kyle and I. And then, proceeded to be like, really, okay, cool. This scene is sick as hell. It was right as Poland's book came out. Like we were there when it came out. And I'll say Jamaica. And it proceeded to be like really dark and dour and like, that's when my pessimism of the space started, when everybody started getting optimistic. And I'm like, some really gnarly stuff can happen here. But I was like, okay, cool. Now I don't have to open one. Somebody else already did it. And then I was like, nope. So I head down, did what we were doing. And, we ended up here, but, just happy that people are really trying to do it with good intention. But I don't know. Do you have any response to that story in relation to what you're doing?
Well, I think that people get excited about the shiny new object, but they don't know the power of what they're working with. So there's a lot of people that are in the space that feel empowered to serve medicine or to start a retreat center, whatever it is, that don't have the foundation in place. So, there's different schools of approach. There's the indigenous school of approach, which is typically through an apprenticeship and a blessing of somebody that's your teacher. And then there's the Western psychological approach, which involves a lot of education. And a lot of people are circumventing both of those, and we're incorporating both of those. So I think that's one of the big distinctions between what we're doing and what's happening generally, is that there's people out there that are self-proclaimed shamans that really don't have the foundation underneath them to be serving medicine. So that's what I see happening. We
Can you dig into that? Are there any pillars there around like what is that shamanic training? Like the composition of it, or
as far as the shamanic trainings, a lot of the pillars are that people have many, many years of very deep self-exploration under the tutelage of a teacher, and so we're living in a very different context now where everything is so distributed and so fractured. Society is so fractured. We don't have those opportunities for deep inquiry that's held by an apprenticeship program. So I don't see much of that happening. Most of the work that is happening right now is in the Western psychological approach with trainings that are happening at institutions or outside of institutions that have that kind of basis. But there are people, they're just much quieter, that are doing the older approach of having an apprenticeship where you get really worked and you have to do your own work in the jungle in Peru or wherever it is, or in Mexico. So yeah, I think that it's really like there's going to be a humbling moment for this whole industry of people realizing the tools that they're working with and needing to understand that there's a lot of education that everybody needs about what are the realms that we're working with, because it's powerful to deconstruct reality and then put it back together and support others in doing so.
Do you have any reaction to like the Western psychological thing in relation to like, I sometimes try to be quippy and say things like it's all kind of Pavlovian, Skinnerian, like how is what we're doing right now a little bit different from behaviorism? But like what you coming from a transpersonal orientation as a therapist, and you look at what's happening, you're like, oh, cool. Yeah, these Western tools are going to be perfect for psychedelics. Like, are they?
I don't think that they necessarily are. So
I think there's huge limitations.
And then, just because you've gone to grad school for 3 years does not mean that you are a good therapist. That was like my big disenchantment with the school or the field of psychology was I finished grad school and was like, whoa, half my colleagues here, I would not recommend to anybody to go see them. So, people were still working through their own shadow material.
Could be a generous number too.
Yeah, that's probably overly generous. Yeah. Actually, I can only think of like 2 people in my graduating cohort that I would have recommended people to go see. So
you have a high bar.
I do have a high bar. Yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah. So, those are tools. I think that some of the frameworks of attachment theory or humanistic psychology, there's even Freudian work that's useful. There's a lot of good frameworks and information out there, but it's not the full picture. So that's why I like transpersonal psychology, because it opens the aperture of like, oh, there's a lot more happening than just the way that we were influenced by our parents. Yeah.
Yep. A little bit more than the biographical.
Going back to what Ian-Michael was saying like a minute ago, I think actually when I was in Miami a few times within a few weeks, but I can't remember if it was the time that you and I met, Joe, but I was at this investor conference in Miami back in, I guess, May.
That Bazinga one. Yeah, I didn't go to that.
Yeah.
I think that was Bicycle Day, actually.
It was Bicycle Day, wasn't it?
Obnoxious pick for investment conference.
Yeah. I mean, I spoke at that.
Nice.
I presented at that conference and I started out, there was maybe 100 or so investors in the room. And I started out my talk and I said, Happy Bicycle Day. And I don't think really many or any of them knew what I was talking about. And that's part of the point that I wanted to make was that
no one knows the history.
Yeah. And there's, they're not so much these days because the markets obviously have really dried up generally, and especially for psychedelics and biotech. But, there's all these investors in the space, or at least who are looking at the space, and almost none of them actually know what any of this is, like at all. They just sort of have heard, like, I think a lot of them think this is the second coming of cannabis, cannabis 2.0. And it's widely acknowledged, like everyone knows there's mass mental health challenges pre-COVID, certainly during and post-COVID. And they're like, oh, this is like a shiny new thing that maybe can generate huge returns. But there's no knowledge or awareness of like the layers of depth and complexity and like how deep this rabbit hole goes. And I'm actually in my own contemplation of like whether the medical model, I know the medical model is ultimately how this gets out to a lot more people. I think
it's a good portion of how it scales.
Yeah, for sure. But I'm like, I struggle to see how a lot of this stuff, I was with somebody yesterday who was telling me about an experience that they had that was quite out there, as you both can appreciate.
Happens once in a while.
Yeah. And it's like how like the doctors and clinicians, I don't know how they even like make sense of a lot of this. Because
Eric Davis, the writer, commentator, philosopher, has a lot of great quippy lines. One is, what does the therapist or psychiatrist do when God enters the room?
What?
they're out of their element and they're in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
And I didn't read this article. I flagged it to read later, but I think Adele LaFrance just is either wrote something or is trying to promote like the word, the term and the word love being used in research around psychedelics, because it's like hard for it to be included in any like clinical research. But as both of you know, it's like kind of fundamental to any of these experiences. And it's, how could you kind of have even a sense of the whole picture without like love being a part of the qualitative.
Well, the problem comes with the definition. I actually got into a really long multi-hour discussion about like clinical inclusion of this term a while ago, and there's no good agreeable definition that would have worked for clinicians. You know, back then, I don't know what's developed at this point. Maybe Adele has some good, Dr. LaFrance has some good advice. I don't know. I should record her. She's in Denver. She's only like right down the road from me, so it's silly I haven't like met up with her. Yeah, she's top mind. I don't know. Do you have a clinical definition for love that would be useful for research?
Oh, I don't. I'm still a student of love myself, but I know that there's a texture of what is being described that's really important, which could be synonymous with God. So which is also a problematic term. So you're saying, what does a therapist do when God enters the room? You know, it's how do we relate to the ineffable? And that's really the bigger question. So a lot of people have these experiences with psychedelics where they recognize the nature of something that is way beyond us, the divine, God, consciousness, could be called love. And because that's indefinable, or because our minds and our words are only able to point in that direction, it's something that we shy away from, because it's not like, oh, here's the prescribed system that you can put in a clinical protocol to show people how to appropriately interact with this ineffable force.
Like, there's a lot of reason why CBT has been researched so much. It's like very easy to replicate, and this other stuff is so much more difficult.
Yeah. And I think it's also, maybe I'm overthinking this, but like, when I think about the work that we're able to do with somebody over the course of 7 days, in a setting like Holos, deep in nature, versus, what's possible in 6 hours or even 2 hours at a clinic in Austin or Denver or Toronto. It's just so much more vast. And, we had a documentary, part of it shot at Holos. And one of the things that we talked about in like the closing scene with myself, Ian-Michael, and Samantha, who's our culture director and one of our core advisors, is really about like all of the great, the Grof and Albert Hoffman and Sasha Shulgin all knew deeply like that these tools work better in nature. Like, that.
Stan said some things like at the 5-hour mark, he would take people outside. Like roughly speaking. So like you would have there's something about confusing inner and outer realities that's complex.
Yeah.
Totally. But yeah, like how many people do you know have had the most amazing experiences outside? Most of the psychedelic people I know, that's the case.
Yeah.
But it depends on what kind of work we're doing, what kind of exploration we're doing.
Yeah.
We're just looking for the numinous,
Yeah, nature is like, it's amazing to me how disconnected I was from nature. And
it happens quick.
Yeah, it does happen quick. And, I lived in a condo in Toronto for a bunch of years, and I just don't believe we're meant to live like that. Like after, whether I go down to Holos for a week or a month, like the like walking barefoot in the jungle and touching the dirt, and like it does something. It charges you. It invigorates you. Like every time I leave there and come back to North America, it's like just feel alive and invigorated. And I really believe that's our natural state. And not everyone can live in the jungle, but there's something about, it's almost like nature is on our side, and it's almost like it's here for our healing.
Interesting. Anything to add to that?
I mean, that was pretty articulate, Alex. I really love watching the way that this invitation of us working together and creating this has touched you. That's really a real part of the journey for me, is like recognizing that we all are on a multi-year maybe multi-lifetime journey of understanding who we are.
Yeah.
And it's really an honor to watch that with you. While you were talking, I was getting absorbed in this honeybee over there in the bougainvilleas. And yeah.
The woman we met earlier is a painter, and she did a lot of this stuff.
Oh, wow.
before.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's an excellent Sri yantra. But you were talking about the experiences in nature, and the first time I took psilocybin, I turned into a bee and went down into the ground, and it was a great experience. So
maybe you actually are that bee.
I am that bee, actually. Yeah. And we all are.
This is how we end up crashing cars, guys.
Yeah, there's something there's a Rumi quote that I read at a friend's wake after he passed away when we were 18 due to substance use. And we are the bees, and our body is the honeycomb. Cell by cell, we made it. And you can look at that macrocosmically or microcosmically, like consciousness itself is weaving this world. And also macrocosmically, like individually, we are cells within a greater mind of God. And so part of this mission of Holos for me is like, we are inviting people to come to this beautiful place that we've created, or that we're creating these multiple places where they can collect some nectar and bring it back to wherever they live, and like bring more sweetness to their lives. So that's where I went as you were talking about nature being on our side.
So I want to dig in with some nuance here.
Yeah.
So you said like, cells, mind of God, etc. The thing that like tripped me up was one of the more complex C words for me, consciousness. And I don't know what to do with that word usually. I have some philosophical training. I've been around for a while. Like everybody's using it. And I don't necessarily understand the implication, right? Is it just like, how do you like to do it?
So I see,
like, is it inclusive of the unconscious?
Definitely. Yeah. So I think awareness is a tool of consciousness, but I see the whole universe as conscious, like including the rocks. So consciousness being our ability to sense. And I believe that even atoms are expression of consciousness. So getting into the nuance of it, I think that it's something that you phenomenologically can only know. And then there are empirical ways that we can study consciousness. Like I used to work with the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and they look at how consciousness influences the physical reality, and the way that there are objective metrics that we can use to study the way that thought and consciousness help to create form. Does that make sense?
Are we using it interchangeably with awareness?
No, awareness I see as a tool of consciousness, consciousness being the actual like atomic reality.
I like to say experience as the atomic reality, following off of Alfred North Whitehead.
Okay.
And like things experience.
Yeah.
Actual entities, versus abstractions, things like that. So, I come from like a weird philosophical orientation. It's hard for me to get things sometimes, but so it sounds kind of like a somewhat modernized Hindu philosophy.
I do come from like a more integral philosophy approach as far as in grad school. So, Sri Aurobindo's...
Your school had it in the name.
Yeah, Sri Aurobindo's work certainly influenced both Michael Murphy as well as the creation of the California Institute of Integral Studies. But that already was philosophically aligned with me just based on the things that I had studied in my late teens and early 20s and the meditations that I used to do. But when you say things experience, it's what is that thing that is experiencing? That to me is consciousness. The experiencing is the awareness, is the vehicle for the individuated, you could call it a soul, but the individuated consciousness to be in relation to other things.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I am so curious about how you relate to the word consciousness, because for me, it's like
I think people just use it in a sloppy way.
Yeah.
And I'm just like,
yeah, no, I definitely
accuracy
agree.
used to be important. I don't know what people mean most of the time anymore. They'll say the I word, like one of my least favorite I words. And I'm like, come on. Like, you just say it as if you assume everybody knows what you mean. And you assume think more of your understanding of integration than, yeah. So it's just obnoxious.
I'll send you a chapter that I wrote in an eco-psychology book about phenomenology and the nature of consciousness. And I just visited this mountain that I turned 20 on last week because I was turning 40. And
what's the other name of this mountain?
Denali.
I mean, like, aren't they we're in the process of renaming or
Mount
something?
McKinley. Well, Obama already renamed it Denali because the Athabascan people called it Denali, and then,
it's being renamed to Denali.
Yeah.
I always forgot the name McKinley. Like, I'm kind of glad.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he was part of creating that national park. Yeah.
I've only been able to see it from the bus, but never for real. But keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, but there's like a reverence that you have for natural feature, I guess, or something that is that powerful. And that reverence that I had for this mountain and my time with it helped me to have an experience where that mountain actually had a consciousness. And so I'll share that chapter with you. It may be a little bit academically thick, but it at least points to a way that I experience the universe as being animate. So it's really animism. Is what I am calling consciousness, is like a recognition that everything is alive and aware.
Have you bumped into Peter Schwarstead Hughes, the British philosopher?
No.
He's fascinating. He's a friend. He's kind of in my kind of lineage in a way. He's like a scholar of Whitehead. He's psychedelically inclined. He's helping start one of the first British psychedelic departments at Exeter, which is cool, with Christian Housekeller. He actually... we won't go there yet, but he's an interesting person that you might check out his work because he does a lot on this animism. What's the other, like panpsychism is his word that he likes to use. That's, not his word, it's just a word he uses, but it's, all is mind, all has mind to some degree or another. It's kind of, I think it's great. And it's like an extension of Spinoza, Nietzsche, Whitehead, etc. And I think the Western philosophical tradition is helpful. It's confusing. It's a lot of work. Similar to psychology, you can never read everything.
Yeah.
Well, similar to any field, you can never read all the work.
Right. Well, the word mind is where I get caught up. So like he and I.
Well, we don't even know what mind is.
Exactly. He and I could have a great dialogue on that.
There's a whole field of philosophy, psychology, or philosophy of mind. Yeah. A lot of debate, as you might imagine. Yeah. And mind, consciousness, all these things get a little abstract. And what are we actually fucking talking about?
Exactly.
What we know we're having is experience.
Exactly. And that's where I like to bring it back down to something that is really, like practical, visceral. And that's the way that I relate to consciousness. But I understand your resistance to that word because it's thrown out and used in a very obscure, abstract way.
And I was about to have you guess, but like non-dual is another one that drives me fucking crazy. Yeah. Well, overused.
Well,
people try to oversimplify what it is, and
it's an instant oxymoron because as soon as you say non-dual, you are the one describing the non-dual phenomena, and you've created a dualism. So you've separated what is dual and what is non-dual. So it's oxymoronic. It's
a fine field of study if you want to go there. Like, go and study, but it's like, come on.
Yeah.
Like,
but the experience, I had an experience with a non-dual, state and of true oneness, and it was like, whoa, there is only that thing. It's really hard to actually try to put words around without getting caught up. But like, there is no vantage point to look at the thing because there is only the thing. And there's this amazing Ram Dass line in one of his podcasts where he says, like, it's all one. God, Jesus, Buddha, Christ, all one. And he's like, it's all one except when you're inside of it, then it's zero. The only time it looks like one is when you're looking at it from two.
Formula 0 equals 1.
Yeah.
So like, imagine if there was all sorts of religious scripts out there where you could read about this stuff, where people worked on it for many hundreds, if not thousands of years.
Imagine that.
What's your take on the
India people? Check out those things.
Joe, I'm gonna turn the tables and ask you a question, but this the sort of religious path for psychedelics, I always forget the name of the, at Berkeley, there's like near the UC Berkeley, there's not a seminary. What's the name of the sort of religious leaders who will be licensed to take?
Talking about Star King Theological
No, but what are they called? They're like
chaplaincy.
Chaplaincy. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What is your take on that path? Michael Pollan always talks about that will be an interesting path to track, the chaplaincy path. What's your take on?
Oh, he's right. He's right that it's going to be interesting.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah,
I don't usually tell him he's right, but he's close. It's forcing everybody to come to our frame in our philosophical approach and like practical approach.
Mm-hmm.
It's ridiculous. Like we're not going to get there.
Yeah.
Best we can do is be the best examples of what we want to show up to be.
Mm-hmm.
We can try to be a Joe Stalin if we wanted to and force it down everybody's throat, but then tens of millions of people die and, things don't go nice. Yeah, of course I think I'm right, but there's plenty of room for people to experiment to find out what's better for them, maybe, or more appropriate for them at that point of view. I have become buddies with this, I think he's an Episcopal priest still. I don't think he like dropped his ordination, but he dropped his post. And now he's like on his own kind of mission to include that and like go around the country and talk to Christian leaders around the country, if not internationally. And I think that's fucking cool. And then there's this really interesting set of Jewish leaders, rabbis that are doing similar work. Zach Kamenetz in the Bay.
Oh yeah, sure.
And the Episcopal dude is Hunt Priest, literal last name Priest.
Priest, wow, yeah. Yeah, I've heard of him.
He always says it's all so ridiculous. Yes, he understands.
Yeah.
But incredible people, both Zach and Hunt are amazing. And they're just trying to spread the word. And it's, we have to, when we don't understand the history, we get confused. Like, psychedelics are a big part of religious history for our species.
I mean, the immortality key. Like, Brian is Murarescu is a friend of ours. And
Dan Brown. Brian Murarescu.
Yeah.
I told him, he says Kaikion with the Rhode Island accent.
Yeah.
Once, because he calls it Kukion.
Kukion, yeah. Yeah, that work, Brian, I can't remember how many years, like something like 12 years of research for that book. And
he went forever. Yeah. He did a ton of research.
Yeah. Brian's a brilliant.
I've become friends with one of the classicists he cited in there who found, I think, remnants in the Iberian Peninsula.
Yeah. Brian's such an amazing guy. And, that book, I really subscribe to that belief that like the origin of all major religions had psychedelics as part of it. And certainly,
but it kind of like discounts our endogenous nature. Like it's not necessarily the plants, it's us. It's not necessarily substance, it's always in us. And that's, it's why a lot of like even ascetic Hindu Buddhist traditions don't need substance. It's like all about you and your relationship to universe. It's nice to have a mediated experience through ayahuasca, but not exactly essential.
Yeah,
but I somewhat agree with you here. At the very least, there was a massive non-ordinary states economy in the ancient world, if not holotropic economy.
Yeah, Eleusis,
right.
which is such an incredible, kind of...
I had some people telling me it was salvia the other day.
Oh, really?
It's like fascinating.
Huh.
We're going to have some active debate. I encourage debate around this because I wasn't there.
I think like I mentioned Ram Dass a minute ago, and I think Ram Dass is a good, mention around this. Is like, he had, starting at Harvard with Tim Leary, like after that, and certainly when he got fired, had I think thousands and thousands of explorations with different psychedelics, plant and chemical, and he says in the great film that my cousin who worked for him produced, Becoming Nobody, says, I got high and high and high and high. And every time I came down and went to India looking for a way to stabilize that state without medicine, without drugs and psychedelics. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at is like, it's us, it's not the drugs, but the drugs can help show us these higher states.
Have you met Aaron Orsini yet?
No.
Autistic Psychedelic Society.
Really?
He had this great podcast with him. He's got some great books. He's helping like turn on a lot of autistic folks. And he had this really great analogy. It's like you get all of a sudden you're just in mainland China in the middle, but all of a sudden you can like drink this thing and all of a sudden you can understand it for like 20 minutes, 30 minutes. You're like, oh yeah, cool. But you do it enough, you start to learn that language. And it becomes like, oh, okay, cool. Now I speak that language. I understand people a lot better. And I can like play that game a little better to like, so that's how his process went. I don't know how it's going to be for everybody. I'm sure it's going to be quite diverse. But yeah, it sounded really similar to what you were saying.
We have like a story time tradition at the end of some of our ceremonies, or sometimes before going to bed with my kids or my partner. And last night I was talking to my partner and telling a story, and the story was of being in India and having this interaction with one of my teachers that was fully endogenous. And if I think back to some of my most powerful psychedelic experiences, they had nothing to do with ingesting, or they didn't involve ingesting a substance. So whether it was breath work or climbing a mountain or singing behind a waterfall or chanting or just being really present and meditating, those are as powerful as any of the 5-MeO, ayahuasca, San Pedro, peyote experiences that I've had. So they're all tools, they're all vantage points. And this is where I come back to the word consciousness. I think that a lot of these plants or substances have a window that they're offering us into consciousness, or into the nature of consciousness. And we can get there in other ways too. And that's why I was looking for waterfalls, because I had an experience when I was 18 of unity consciousness behind a waterfall. I was singing behind a waterfall in Mexico outside of Yalapa, and I started singing behind this waterfall, and all the droplets started reflecting the sound. It reflected back to me, and it created this echo chamber of vibration that dissolved my individuated self into all that is. And that was kind of a beautiful, intense experience, and it didn't involve any psychedelics. So
if we could only replicate that.
yeah.
So I think one of the coolest revolutions, like Stan and Christina's holotropic breath work, being it's super easy technique. It might not work the first time, but it's going to work the first 5 times probably.
Yeah.
And it shows you this is all in me. It's not like there's magic inside necessarily. A ton of magic inside the LSD molecule or inside, DMT, MAOIs. It's like this interface within us, and it's super replicable, and it builds agency in the individual. Just saying, whoa, look how powerful I am.
Yeah.
Because right now we're with such unpowerful figures walking around the world. Look, oh, cool. It's in me.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting exploration too, the return of agency, because as a society, we have become so dependent on the systems that we're a part of. So yeah, I have a curiosity about how psychedelics play a role in that, how counterculture plays a role in that, how new education plays a role in that, liberating people's ability to have agency. So breath work, I've never thought about it that way, but it and I guess I have talked about it that way, but I've never really articulated it the way you just did. Yeah, you can modulate your own experience with breath, which is beautiful. Whereas a lot of times with psychedelics, they just take you, and you learn to have agency inside of the mescaline matrix or inside of an ayahuasca experience. You hone your own consciousness and your capacity to be in dialogue with that spirit or with that overwhelming experience. But breath work is unique in that you have that modulation capacity. And that's, I think, one of the skills that we need as human beings right now, is like looking at our own capacity to regulate and have freedom of our own state of being.
Yeah. Like, who's here to save the world? Is it Viacom and General Electric, or is it us?
Probably not Viacom, and maybe I don't know. I haven't been following with General Electric. They sold a lot of businesses and bought a lot of it.
But commentary on solar power and nuclear energy.
Yeah, I mean,
that's generally what I do there.
For me, when I started getting into this work, I remember I used to travel a lot for work. Yeah, I still sort of do, but I used to be on a lot of flights to like all kinds of cities in the US. And I remember I had just had maybe my first guided psychedelic therapy experience. And I was like flying, I for some reason think it's Houston. I was like walking through the Houston airport, and I was looking at someone in the food court. Like,
it's a wild airport, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Was it George Bush?
Yeah.
George Bush, yeah.
Huge cowboy boot sculptures.
Yeah. And I was like walking past the food court, saw some man eating some double Whopper cheeseburger situation, and like gulping down like a 32-ounce Pepsi or something
at an airport.
And I was just like watching him, and I was like, he's poisoning himself. Like, this is poison.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Mark Hyman, Dr. Mark Hyman, the functional medicine doctor, who's an amazing human. I was at a small gathering he was speaking at a couple months ago, and he talks a lot about food and the diet. And he's like, 70% of the American diet doesn't even meet the definition of food. And it's
Called
like
food-like product.
Yeah, food-like product. And it's like, what are we doing? Like, psychedelics have really opened me and the aperture up to like see this as like these companies are poisoning people, selling people poison with lots of sugar and all kinds of other shit. Am I allowed to say that on this podcast?
Poison?
No, shit.
Sure.
Okay.
I said worse.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Already.
Cool. I didn't know if this was like HBO or not, you know. And making, you know, huge sums of money, these big Coca-Cola and all these companies, and then making people unhealthier, which feeds the healthcare system, which is driven by profit to treat people and keep them sick. And it's just this whole, you know, Ian-Michael talks, sometimes I've thought Ian-Michael's like too far out on the side of like, we're heading to societal collapse and these sorts of things. And other moments I'm like, he may be reading things more clearly than I think. Like, I mean, our society is very sick, not only physically, but certainly mentally. And, you know, Dr. Gabor Mate, who's recently became one of our advisors, who's, you know, this incredible mind. I refer to him as a Jedi. His new book, which comes out in September, is called The Myth of Normal. And I haven't obviously read it yet, but I do think that like that is one of the things that kind of is keeping society so sick, is this notion of like regressing to the mean of normal, and like people are not expressed. And in my psychedelic experiences, that's been one of the profound learnings, is like psychedelics help us, or help me at least, like fully express the brain, and thoughts and feelings and emotions. And that is a huge part of why people are so anxious and sad and depressed, is like, we're not expressing ourselves fully. We're like contained and keeping things in. And I think these medicines can really, really help with that. Is like allow us to like fully express and release energy. And I just had an experience where I sort of tapped into this wound in my stomach, that I was really disconnected from, and the facilitator helped me sort of move this energy through in very, you know, Stan Grof-like fashion. And I'm like, afterwards, I'm like, wow, like that energy that doesn't get expressed and released, like turns into cancer or something. Like, I really believe that is how this works. Is
Body
like,
keeps the score.
Body keeps score. Yeah.
Body says no. Or
Yeah.
what is that? When the body says no, right?
When the body says
Yeah.
no, but the body also does keep score. You know, Steve, who's this amazing human, and he's our executive coach and just like an incredible brother to both of us. He, you know, he said to me recently, like a lot of what's missing in the psychedelic work is the somatic body stuff. Like,
there's people out there saying no body work ever in psychedelics. They seem a little uneducated.
Yeah. I mean, Stan and Brigitte talk about how critical it is to this work. And I also do see the other side, or not the other side, but I see the other argument of like, how do you, as a medical system, like bring in people on powerful substances and then have people like, you know, rubbing their hands and their feet and touch, like, I do get the, you know,
there's such a mismatch.
The fear. Yeah.
There's so much misalignment with where we need to be with what we have now. Yeah. Let's talk about the future. So y'all have a good amount of interesting things happening. So let's talk about Costa Rica first. So where are we at with Costa Rica? Are you open? You have retreats going? What's going
Costa
on down
Rica's
there?
open. We have retreats going. We're in the process of building out the long-term retreat center and treatment facilities, and then also the community. So we've got the first house being built now. There's a couple more that are getting built soon. People are moving in, and we've got our agriculture that's really, you know, like a massive farm to table project, but it's also kind of a contingency plan, you might say. So I moved to Costa Rica when the pandemic really sunk in.
Mm-hmm.
I was headed to run the third Holos retreat in South Africa. It was going to be breath work and working with these white lions and a leadership school down there. The South African border
What's
closed.
a white lion?
A white lion? Oh, wow. You're trying to open up a really big can there.
I've never heard of it.
So
Albino lions?
They're not albino. It's a genetic variant that is unique to that species. And there's other species that are that have like a white recessive gene, or so like the spirit bears in British Columbia. So the white lions had gone extinct in the wild in South Africa, and then
I was thinking there was like a metaphor cultural thing going on, but actual literal lions.
Yeah, no, they're actually like a white pigmentation, and there is a cultural aspect to it. Some of the tribes of South Africa said that the white lions would come when humans were in need of guidance, and that these are like reincarnated masters of, so yeah, they're just very powerful presence. You can go be with these white lions. It's there's a beautiful global white lion protection trust that is reintroducing these beings to the wild. So we were going to go do breath work and meet with these lions in council, and South African border closed. I checked in with my daughter's moms and was like, hey, it looks like, we're in for a little chapter of the new world order. So I'd like to go down to Costa Rica. And so I went down to Costa Rica 2 years ago to settle in and feel what that place was like, get to know the local community, and think about that as a Holos site. So when I talked about contingency planning, we're trying to get our food systems in place, because it's not only education about how you can live off of a regional food system or a local food system, but if things do contract again and travel is closed, or who knows what the governments of the world want to do or what they're going to explore doing with the general population. So yeah, the hope is that we can have a self-sustaining community to the greatest extent possible. So we're working with the local indigenous groups and local farmers to really see how we can optimize the food production on this site. So that's just a little aside. Like any of these, we could go down pretty long rabbit holes, but that's where the Holos Diamante site is in construction, but also hosting retreats. So we've got a whole slew of retreats coming this summer and fall. And then we're going to open the future retreat center in 2023 with a new temple and new guest rooms. And then we're starting to scout where else in the world would be the right site for having a Holos community and retreat center. So we've looked in British Columbia, Oregon, we're looking in Colorado, the Caribbean, and it's really about, the regulatory environment and what looks like where we can really do deep plant medicine work or work with psychedelics, as well as just the right social environment where we can really make a good impact on the local community and learn from the local community. So, yeah.
That's great.
That's where we're at.
I would just add to that around the residential and community aspect. Two things. One, there's, I mentioned earlier in our chat that some people who have bought property at our first site intend to live there full time, others part time, and the retreat center that we're building, and eventually, like when there's more of a kind of hospitality path for people who aren't necessarily part of a group program. This is a relatively small project. We believe that this work is best done in more intimate groups. We're not fans of 60, 70, 80 person ceremonies, but having, these residences that are available for people who want to come for a month, or you live in New York or Toronto, where I'm from, and January through April is kind of crappy. Come rent a place. We have these residences that are available for, rent by the month, and come stay and work remotely and be on the land and swim in waterfalls and access the farm and come to an integration circle every week and go to yoga and meditation. And I think that I know that there is huge demand for an offering like that.
You have fiber?
We're hoping to have Starlink in 2023 as well. But we have fiber at time of recording. And yeah, so I think that there's this huge demand for that. And then the other piece of it that I think is really critical, going back to the I word, is like people are so much of this work is about community and support, and I think that is really missing from the space currently. And I think a lot of the the public companies and some of the clinic companies, like it's like a place you go and you have your session but like people are looking, not everyone, but a lot of people are looking for something to be a part of. And we're really trying to, we went through this concept development and built this beautiful brand with an amazing group called Alara and an amazing guy named Ben Pundle. And we're really trying to like design and build Holos as not just a place that you come once a year or a couple times a year or once every 24 months, but really something that you can be a part of on an ongoing basis, something that has an offering that is, more accessible to people who don't live in, where a Holos site is. So that shifts things to, be partially digital, which we're working on. But like, we want to have the psychology shifts from like Holos is a place that I go to, it's something that I'm a part of. And we just had a group leave, this retreat, I don't know, 10 days ago or so. And in my like little closing spiel to them, I'm like, you guys are part of this now. Like whether you come back in the next 6 or 9 months or send somebody you love and care about, like you're a part of this community if you want to be. We want you to be. So I think that's really missing so far, and it's really needed, like something that people can plug into and be a part of. And integration circles are a part of that. Having access to content like breathwork and meditation and yoga, and access to therapists and integration specialists and coaches for people who want to do more ongoing private integration work is critical. So that's part of like what we're trying to shape here is something that people are a part of. That's not just a place you go, on a beautiful, amazing retreat, but something that you can plug into.
It's important. Community is underrated.
Yeah.
Community is medicine, and it's
totally. That's a huge part too. Going back to what I was saying earlier about sick. Like our society is not well. We've gotten away from community living. And, in COVID, in lockdown, I was in Venice Beach for the first few months of it. And I have a really dear friend named Lindsay and my closest friend named Janet, who's one of our advisors, and another dear friend named Todd. The four of us who were all sort of living within a block or two of each other. And like during the first months of lockdown, we had dinner together 3 nights a week, and we're like deep in community. And we all kind of say like those were some of the best times of our lives. And I think that and this is part of Ian-Michael's genius around this vision of Holos, that when I first met him, I was like, wow, this is really big. Like living and residential and a community around a retreat center. Like this is not a simple thing, but part of the genius is that like that is what's missing. Everyone is living these very individuated lives, and we need more. We're meant to be tribal and more, communally living. And I think that we need, an option or options that are somewhere in the middle of how we live now, most people in the West, and a kibbutz in Israel, or a commune in Tennessee. Like we need something in the middle, and I think Holos is part of that. It's part of, and hopefully will be a model for other people to follow. We really want, I know you do, like deeply, like want to create a model for other people to try to replicate of like community living, and certainly doing medicine work with like high degrees of safety and integrity, and like, hey, like flattery, imitation is the highest form of flattery. So, like
my community in Vermont, breathwork community, I've been a part of them since 2003. Probably started emailing them in 2002. Was suspect of holotropic breathwork. Thought it was a dangerous cult at first, and turns out it wasn't. But I was, watched carefully. But then, it turned into, nobody was really living there other than the family. But it was like a second home for everybody. You go there, you get rejuvenated, you connect with all your kind of, friends and family that you kind of develop over time there. And it's such a beautiful thing. And for me, that was like, okay, this is kind of, for me, the gold standard. And, to hear like actually adding in a residential piece sounds really cool, and adds a little bit of depth to the community. So you're like, go for it.
Someone was saying the other day, I can't remember if it was you, Ian-Michael, or somebody else, but like that having people who live there and are like firmly rooted there, like it helps people who are coming in like ground, that there's like these pillars of community there. People like Jesse and Carmen and others like is helpful for people who are making this pilgrimage. You know, Holos is in this incredible valley, and it's a journey to get there. It's not a hop and a skip. It's a pilgrimage to get there, and it's
What's the process like to get there?
How do you get there?
San Jose Airport.
Fly to San Jose, capital of Costa Rica, and then the easiest way to get there is to hop on right from San Jose Airport, a quick 20-minute puddle jumper on one of two airlines. I think each of them has like 3 flights a day to a small little airport landing strip called in Capos, which is near Manuel Antonio National Park, and then we're a relatively short drive from Capos to Holos. And yeah, like the community piece is such a differentiator from anyone else that I've certainly seen in the field, or even what people are talking about, in the kind of retreat space. And there's not that many groups. And I think largely because it's a hard thing to do. It's a lot of responsibility, and it's a hard business. But it's something our team is like super passionate about. And we just have this incredible canvas in Costa Rica to create it on.
Yeah. So let's talk beyond Costa Rica. So it sounds like by end of 2023, it'll be kind of in its final form, but it's already quite active now. But what might be next, or what does the vision look like?
Yeah. Well, I spoke a little bit about the contingency plan. And so I do look for locations that will be climate stable. So we're really looking at the 50, 100-year vision. So Diamante Valley, Costa Rica, it's going to be very stable, even if things change climatically. And we've looked in Colorado, Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, for where can we really get established, learn the local ecosystem, create one of these Holos centers that can be there in perpetuity for, decades or centuries to come. So we haven't yet chosen location number 2. We'll start scouting more again in 2023, once we have Holos Diamante well established, but very open to suggestions or partnership too, where there's an old motel or hospitality location that is just not being utilized fully, that wants to reactivate it with a new ethos. So yeah, we'll expand our team at that time. We're looking for a good general manager of the Holos site so that we can really focus on the larger vision again. And yeah, it's enough to do this lift in Costa Rica. We chose a site that is dramatic and beautiful, but also comes with a lot of complexity culturally and environmentally. Like, we're working with the jungle, and the jungle is always trying to capture everything back into its fold. It's like the most biodiverse place on earth just down the road. So we are in a constant dialogue with massive forces of rain and biodiversity and a lot of really interesting cultural contexts. So Costa Rica is where we're cutting our teeth, so that it'll be a lot easier wherever we go after.
Comment, if you will, about this longer term vision. Like, how many companies do you know that think further than 20 years out?
Oh, wow.
Especially in psychedelics.
Yeah, no, I mean, in psychedelics, I see companies that are thinking like 5 years out, and how quick can we exit, and when can we sell our company or put it on the stock exchange? And that's not at all how my mind works. And I know that Alex's doesn't, and our whole team is dedicated to really creating something that has impact for generations to come. There's
builders of the temple.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we recognize the temporality of all of it, but still it makes sense. If you're going to put effort and endeavor to build something, build it so that it lasts, and so that it can be utilized and care for people for a long time to come. And so I was a builder in Alaska, and we always built houses that were designed to be at least 100 years, so that people know that they have that level of security and that they're energy efficient and all of that. So that's the way I look at building villages too, or building little micro communities. It's like, how long can we plan for? And one of the things I learned in Costa Rica, just looking at the ecology around me, and like I was like having this moment on my porch where I was looking out at all the plants, and I was like, wow, if me individually, if I was to start to learn about these plants and like test out eating these different bushes and leaves in the jungle, it would take me a whole lifetime to start to discover like what works well for my body and what works for this disease or that disease. So there's an intergenerational reality that we live inside of acquired knowledge, or like knowledge that is transferred over time. And if we don't start thinking about our cultures that way, where we have the opportunity to grow a body of knowledge or awareness about a particular ecology or particular healing modalities, if we don't start thinking in that longer term context of passing down knowledge, then we're really like, we're a short-lived society. Like if that's our mentality, that, you know, it's like, well, what can I gain this year or in the next 5 years? Then that's going to be also what we lose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's going to be really interesting times coming up, everybody. Already is. But you know, Hurricane Katrina is the start, or one of the many starts, and there's more coming.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that. I mean, to what Ian-Michael was saying. I mean, in the year and a half plus that we've been sort of working together, along the way, I've felt and noticed a bunch of signals that we have something really right, that we're like doing a bunch of things right, and that the intention of the company is really aligned and
do you have a mission statement?
Yeah, we do. The realization of our inherent wholeness, and to create, that's really like the vision statement, and the mission statement is to create, centers that can cultivate that, for people in nature. And, along the way, like when I met Ian-Michael in person for the first time in BC, and really like felt into like, not only meeting him in human form for the first time, but like felt that what he and Stan had like dreamt up and envisioned was so powerful and so important. And I felt that I could help them, him like bring it into reality, into form. And along the way, in the last year and a half or so, like we've had a bunch of signals that we're doing something right. And that the intention of Holos is aligned, or the essence of it is very good. And it's been some of the people in the field, I mentioned some of their names earlier, who have gotten involved, whether formally or informally, have been here to support us and have really encouraged us. And some of the investors, we've been raising money for the last number of months, and it's been an interesting thing to watch. Like some of these public companies raise like crazy sums of money on a lot of hype and not much vision, or any vision. And we have a really strong vision, and, the investors, and I can, mention who a few of them are, have really gotten involved with Holos and supported Holos, not because they think that this is going to be, the highest return investment in psychedelics or in their portfolio, but because they feel and share our view that this is really important, that we have very, very high caliber centers doing this kind of work in the world, and they want to help Ian-Michael and I and our team like bring these into the world. So, really like looking at the impact of Holos, the future impact. And I was having breakfast yesterday with a really successful businessman who's an investor in the field and amazing guy. And he was saying to me like that, the group that he's a part of looked at Holos, and he's like, the one piece that we couldn't quite get on board with was like the scalability of it. And when I got into Holos with Ian-Michael, I, come from like tech startups and e-commerce, and I struggled with but how does it scale? And what I realized was like, why does everything have to scale? Like some things are perfect the way they are at like a smaller scale, whether, excellent. And like my answer to him yesterday, and generally when this question comes up, is like, we're thinking about scale in a different sense. Not opening 500 Holos around the world, But can we open, starting with Costa Rica, can we open one, and then can we replicate it in a couple of other geographies Ian-Michael mentioned? And can we build something that resonates with very high impact people? We just had a couple very well-known professional athletes come down and some very successful entrepreneurs. And I see a huge gap in the market of these other retreat centers that they don't offer what we would consider like elevated hospitality. So can we create something that's a bit more upmarket, that resonates with people who are CEOs and founders and even politicians, hopefully one day in the not too distant future, and other people who are like solving the complex social issues that face us at these times? Can we create places where those people will come and do their personal work, ideally in groups, but also some, as you said, Joe, like starting personally? Can we create the places where they come and do the work, and then they go back to their communities, to their companies, to their nonprofits and their, local governments, and are more conscious, connected, philanthropic, compassionate human beings? And that is huge scale. And I think that that's a role that we can play. I think that's the role we will play if we make, keep making good decisions and finding more amazing people to build it with. And I think that is huge scale in maybe in an indirect way, but that's sort of how
the Huxley model versus the Leary model, right? You're like, people with a lot of influence and power need to also be healed, and as a result, there's also a lot of impact. But they saw it as mutually exclusive. I see it as both and.
Yeah.
So
I had this great vision the other day of, and maybe somebody listening or maybe you, Joe, can help with this, but we were, at Holos 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, and I just had this vision of AOC, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez from New York, who I've heard is a pretty big advocate for psychedelics and has even put a bill on the House floor around psychedelic research. But I was like, wow, like I had this vision of her coming to Holos with a few Democratic Congress people and a few Republicans, perhaps if she could find a couple open-minded ones, and coming and sitting in ceremony and spending a couple of days and seeing what's possible from that setting and that space. And I, like,
are you familiar with the historical precedent from Esalen? So weirdly, Democrats and Republicans are almost more separate than this historical precedent. If you want to go for it. It was like the Soviet American reconciliation Holzberg breathwork retreats at Esalen, and everybody left friends, and they much deeper intercultural understanding between all parties.
Yeah, it may have been one of the turning points in the Cold War, actually.
Really?
Yeah.
It was Stan's idea.
Stan and Michael.
Yeah.
And then they've had a whole initiative since then with Russia.
I met a really interesting guy, John Allen, lives in Synergia Ranch, a little outside Santa Fe. He was one of the primary architects of Biosphere 2.
Right.
And he apparently used to host summits of Soviet astronauts, American astronauts, and then also inner space explorers as well. And he had all sorts of beautiful photos of, like, I think Albert Hoffman with like all these astronauts, and like just amazing vision from that gentleman as well, John Allen.
Yeah.
He's not known enough. He's in his 90s. It's amazing. Yeah. You got to go to Synergia Ranch.
In Santa Fe? Or
a little outside Santa Fe. Yeah.
In New Mexico?
Yeah.
But not there.
Yeah.
Yeah. That cross-cultural, cross-disciplinary exchange is like one of the hallmarks of Esalen, and it's definitely something that I have put into my prayers for what Holos can be. And the other day, a couple months ago, we had a Wirikuta elder, a northern Mexico elder that was serving peyote. And at the same time, there was this Visionary Fund, which is like a crowdfunding platform for visionary projects. They had this event and they had invited a Rinpoche from Nepal. And so I invited the Rinpoche to come sit in the peyote ceremony with us. And he was too tired from travel, so he slept. And then as the sun rose, as we were finishing the ceremony, he came down off of one of the cabins and shows up in the middle of the ceremony. And he like wants to meet this Wirikuta elder. And so we had this really beautiful exchange happening between this northern Mexican he didn't call himself a shaman. He calls himself a student, and this recognized Rinpoche, who's building a university for world peace at the birthplace of the Buddha in Nepal. So we've got these two really beautiful teachers, students, men that are there, sharing their perspectives on reality. And then the Wirikuta elder says, okay, I think it's time that we go visit this stone. We have an indigenous stone on the property that we don't talk much about, but now it's on a podcast. So, there's this really beautiful stone from like 1500, 2000 years ago that was carved by a group called the Chorotega. And the Chorotega are, that name means those that flee. And they were fleeing from a war that they were having with the Huichol, with the Wirikuta in northern Mexico. So, a couple thousand years later, one of the descendants from this tribe that had forced out the Chorotega is now down in Costa Rica saying blessings and giving offerings to this stone and to these people. And I had this moment where I was watching the reparation and the recognition and the stitching of all of these cultures that was happening in front of me in, being witnessed by this man that's creating a world peace university at the birthplace of the Buddha. And I was like, okay, that's like a signal. We're doing something right. There's a really beautiful exchange happening here. And all of our relations with the indigenous people that have lived in that region and the farmers that have lived in that region for hundreds of years, they all feel very real and whole to me. Like that dialogue is happening. There's very much a recognition that what we're doing is welcome. So yeah, I'm grateful that we're carrying on that legacy of what happened at Esalen, and it feels grounded.
So we'll probably have to wrap. What's your website? And then I want to have one comment before we close.
Yeah, the website is holos.global, HOLOS.global.
Nice score.
And Instagram is the same. Yeah.
Outstanding.
So first of all, this was so much fun. Always great to spend time with you, Joe. And if you're listening and, want to get in touch with us, whether it's you're interested in living or looking at, being a part of the Holos community or investment or anything like that, I can be reached at alex@holos.global. And we'd love to hear from you. And we'd love to have you come visit. We'd love to have you come visit. We need to get that on the calendar, you and David and
I will actually
Kyle.
be in Costa Rica next year. So we should talk.
When?
My calendar knows when.
Okay. Let's get your people and our people in communication. We'll CC them, and
I can finally say that kind of thing. Yeah.
But yeah.
So we have a shared vision now, and I love it. So we're going through all this kind of visioning and rebranding 6 years in. We're like, what are we trying to do? And it came to me. We're trying to bring this Esalen attitude back. That's what I'm trying to do. And Kyle and I, it just clicked. It's like, yeah, of course that's what we're doing. But we had never named it explicitly. And this was maybe just a month or so ago that this came to me. Finally. Okay, now we have that explicit. Now we can go forward. And how do we do that?
How do you explain that to somebody who doesn't really know what Esalen is or hasn't been?
It's this cultural nexus point. And there's so many traditions coming together, so much openness and creativity, friendly cooperation. It's not like the, catty, bratty attitude we see in a lot of academic institutions. It's like, oh, cool, you want to develop that? Cool, great. Have you checked out these 2 books? Maybe that'll help you. Versus that'll never work. Yeah. And, I think there's just a lot of creativity and vision we can bring to the table, and kindness, niceness. Why does everything have to be me versus you and I'm right? We're all in this together, and no one gets out alive. Let's do it.
This was really fun. What a great chat.
No one gets out alive.
Yeah.
Alex and Michael, really appreciate y'all coming.
Thank you, brother.
Great to sit with you under the avocado tree.
And there you have it, Ian-Michael and Alex from Holos Global. And I think you get why we relate a little bit. Philosophically inclined, spiritually inclined, kind of transpersonal forward orientation, kind of coming from Stan Grof. So obviously there's a lot of interesting overlap with us. So yeah, I hope y'all love this podcast. Check them out. I'm sure I'm going to be watching them closely and see if there's any kind of room for fun collaboration. So thank you all for tuning in to Psychedelics today. This is Joe Moore signing off, and we will See you next time. Bye-bye.
Community is emerging from hiding who we are. We are emerging from hiding what we think. We are emerging from 50 years of drug warfare. We are emerging. Emergence, a psychedelic education festival on October the 1st, celebrating the Colorado community of psychedelic practitioners and advocates, with live DJs, artists, food trucks, immersive activities and face painting, and open question and answer sessions with lawyers, doctors, therapists, end-of-life coaches, veterans, folks in recovery, and psychedelic leaders. This one-day event is happening on October the 1st between 12 to 5 p.m. at Real Works in the Reno Arts District of Denver, with an after-party at your mum's house. Tickets are priced between $20 to $100, but no one will be turned away. Free tickets are available, no questions asked. To find out more, go to www.bit.ly/emergencefest.